Okay, in this video, what we're going to look at is the concept of shelf life again and the obsoletes part of that conversation. So if you remember back from the very beginning when we looked at the context video, we talked about products having a 20-week shelf life. And then you have to make a promise to the customer of when they get the product, how long it'll last before it expires or its shelf life. And I believe in the slide, what we talked about was an example of a 75% shelf life out of 20 weeks. So 75% of 20 weeks means 15 weeks. So if that's the promise you make to the customer in sales, you're telling the customer, hey, when you get it, it'll be good for at least 15 weeks. What it means then is you get the other 5 weeks for what's called internal shelf life. Okay? So what that means is your product cannot sit on the shelf more than 5 weeks in my example here, because if it sits on the shelf for 5 weeks and a day, then there's no way you've got enough time left to promise all 15 weeks. In fact, it's a little under 15 weeks, and what we do is we have to scrap it out and throw it away. So what this 5 weeks means then is if you're promising the customer 75% or 15 weeks, you get the other 5 weeks. So visually, this is what it means. The sum of your product safety stock plus your production interval in the supply chain has to be less than or equal to this 5 weeks. And I think you could even argue because of demand variation, or what the field's called forecast error, but because of demand variation, when weeks slow down or when your sales slow down, then product sits on the shelf even longer, so perhaps your ceiling or your maximum level has to be even lower. That's what you have to determine. What I want you to think about, however, is if I obsolete product, let's say $10,000, then the simulation has to go in and it's going to pull in additional material and labor to the tune of another $10,000. Roughly, to be able to replace that. And then it has to get in line to be built, which potentially could impact other orders, but that's got some impact. Plus, if you're going to be late to the customer, then you're going to pick up penalties. So all of a sudden, this becomes a very important conversation out there. Now, something I want you all to think about is this here. If you promise something different to the customer. Let's say you decide to go to 80%. So now instead of promising 15 weeks, you are promising 16 weeks to the customer, which means instead of 5 weeks now internally, you're down to 4 weeks, which means instead of a line across the top here at 5 weeks, now you're down to 4 weeks. So what that means then is in my example, if you increase the promise to the customer, yes, the customer will pay more because it's more fresh, but you cannot have as much sit on the shelf. So then either your safety stock has to go down, or your production interval has to go down, or both have to go down. And if you're uncomfortable with that, then you're going to have to dial back your shelf life promise to something less in our example than the 80% that you promised. So this is a decision where a couple things have to work together in the conversations.